capital of Texas during the 1840s and 50s wasn't much more than a widening in the road with a few buildings. Austin's black population wasn't more than a few dozen, most of them slaves. This is a clear and legal title to a human being here in Travis County. It's a listing of property including the names of black slaves owned by this local family. But on June 19, 1865, emancipation came to Austin and Texas. Blacks gained new status as citizens. Austin was still a small community of few buildings. This is 6th and Brazos. One day the Driscoll Hotel would be built here.
There's a yellow rose in Texas.
The 1880s, blacks arrived in Austin in increasing numbers. The capital of Texas was known as a growing town with opportunity and promise for all. But the 1880s was a period of great transition for Texas blacks. Less than 2 decades had passed since blacks were freed. And while many continued to work the land and earn small wages in physical toil, others became prosperous. Business in Austin was booming, and black business was no exception. Reisinger's Emporium was owned and operated by blacks. The store carried everything from fabrics and dry goods to groceries. 6th Street also had its own black stables and smithy shops. During the 1880s, Austin had its own black professionals too, such as Dr. Abner, one of the first physicians in Texas. He even had an X-ray machine, one of the largest in the state. Local blacks invested their money not only in building fine homes, but also in building new churches and public schools for their children. Tillotson College, one of the state's first colleges for blacks, was established here in 1882. And yet, as there was great improvement, there were great setbacks too. During the 1860s and 70s, freedmen were urged to exercise their voting rights. Blacks registered in great numbers both here and around the state. They elected black members to the Texas legislature and exerted great political power. The Travis County Republican Party chairman was a black, and Austin even had a black alderman. But in 1881, all that began to change. During that year, the old Capitol building was destroyed by fire. This was where blacks helped write the Texas Constitution and guarantee rights to all its citizens. And it seemed like black political power also went up in smoke at the same time. 2 years later, work was underway on the current Capitol building, but it may have been more than symbolic that black chain gangs were used to do the hard labor in building the new capital of Texas. Laws were being passed to separate and exclude blacks, a poll tax to keep them from voting. Even the railroad into Austin would be required by law to segregate passengers. Yet, as work finished on the Capitol in the late 1880s, Austin still held out the prospect for great rewards and challenges for anyone willing to sacrifice, regardless of race. Roy Ferris, 24 Action News. During the 1880s and 90s, literacy tests were used by many southern states in order to control black voting. However, here in Texas, that didn't happen. That's because blacks and whites were opposed to literacy tests. One of the main reasons was the high number of immigrants in Texas, immigrants that helped settle communities like New Braunfels. They were afraid that literacy tests might be used against them to disenfranchise their voting. The National Depression during the 1890s seems to have missed Austin. In fact, black businesses were expanding and increasing in number. Texas ranked second in the nation with the number of black businesses, and Austin played a big part in that. Blacks owned and operated ice cream parlors, grocery stores, pharmacies. Local blacks wrote and published the Herald, one of the largest religious publications in the Southwest. Austin's blacks were entering professions like mail carriers, ministers, even policemen. MZ Herald was Austin's first black officer. Although Congress Avenue was still a dirt street then, black men helped install the rail track for Austin's trolley line. In 1892, everywhere you looked in Austin, the city was growing. To the south, the west, the north, that large building's the University of Texas, and to the east. The Deaf, Dumb, and Blind Institute for Colored Youth was finally built here after years of delay over financing. However, it was here at the county jail where black people with mental problems would wind up. There were no insane asylums for blacks then. Most of Austin's black community supported a segregated society as long as it was equal. Blacks formed their own fraternal organizations like the Knights of Pythias. Women created service and religious clubs. The Baptist Church exerted a strong influence on their lives. Many more churches were built here during this period.
Move members, move Danny. Move members, move Danny.
Joyful sounds would rise from the black churches. This music provided an approved substitute for dancing, a sinful behavior. Every summer, local blacks would celebrate the emancipation on Juneteenth. Yet, as wonderful and promising as life seemed to Austin's black children, there were forces at work that would soon strip blacks of the right to vote. Night raiders would frighten black landowners off their property, and prejudice would be enforced through state laws. Roy Ferris, 24 Action News. This brings us into the 20th century. From here, we'll jump forward to 1912, an era of many firsts for the city of Austin. By 1912, Austin was a full-fledged city. The population had grown to 25,000, about a fifth of them black. Back in 1910, Austin still had a small-town look, but a year later, Scarborough's department store became the city's first skyscraper, with the Littlefield building soon after. In 1905, paving began on Congress Avenue. Local blacks did most of the work, from quarrying the stones to laying the bricks. In 1911, the first automobile appeared on Austin's streets, but the trolley that ran along Congress Avenue became a symbol of prejudice. A new state law required, for the first time, that local public transportation segregate its passengers. But this was not the first serious blow to black civil rights. It was Travis County's own state representative who introduced the bill which brought an end to black political power for many decades. The Terrell election law changed the way candidates were nominated by replacing the open convention system with a closed primary. Blacks could now legally be kept out of political parties and also prevented from voting in the primaries. Thus, politics became the game of the white man, controlling who would be a candidate for public office. The era of the Black Cowboy was coming to an end. It was estimated that at the turn of the century, 1 out of 4 cowboys was black. One of the most famous was Bill Pickett from Central Texas. He was attributed with inventing bulldogging. Pickett made the transition into the modern age by becoming a star in Wild West shows around the country, aided by his assistants, Will Rogers and Tom Mix. Racial tensions were mounting during this period. The film of heavyweight boxing champ Jack Johnson defeating his white opponent was barred from being shown in the state. The legal system appeared to be a tool to be used against blacks. Half of the prison inmates were black. One boy was sent to prison for stealing a 20-cent can of sardines. However, mob justice was even more terrifying. There were over 100 lynchings in the state during the first part of the 20th century. In 1916, Jesse Washington was attacked in Waco. The mob beat, stabbed, mutilated, hanged, and finally burned his body. These violent acts intimidated even the most innocent of blacks and their hopes, plans, and dreams of the future. Roy Ferris, 24 Action News.